All right, so if you're just joining us, this is how things stand. Russia has launched an all-out attack on Ukraine by land, air and sea. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that his aim is to demilitarize and also to denazify Ukraine. Missiles began raining down on several Ukrainian cities in the early hours of the morning, and one of the very first explosions was heard in the capital city of Kyiv. Now, according to information that is coming in even as we speak, there is a second wave of missiles that is now raining down on different locations in Ukraine. This is an attempt by the Russians to systematically destroy Ukrainian armed forces and their ability to stage a resistance against the Russian onslaught. And also, according to information that has just about come in, about 40 soldiers and 10 civilians have been killed in the fighting that has begun since this morning. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has called on all Ukrainian citizens who are ready to defend the country to come forth, to take up arms, and has said that Kyiv will give arms to every Ukrainian citizen who wants to defend his country. And we're also being told that the United Kingdom has summoned its Russian ambassador. Boris Johnson's government has also warned of severe sanctions that are coming towards Russia's way. European Union has said that it will be freezing all Russian assets. It will also halt access of its banks to the European financial markets and will target Kremlin's interests over its barbaric attack on Ukraine. Now, according to officials, US President Joe Biden has said that Washington and its allies will impose severe sanctions over what he has described as Putin's premeditated war on Ukraine. And also, according to reports that have been coming in, 2 Russian civil cargo ships have been hit by a Ukrainian missile strike in the Sea of Azov. Ukraine's military has also reportedly claimed to have destroyed as many as about 4 Russian tanks near the city of Kyiv. And Ukraine has also claimed that it has killed about 50 Russian troops in the Luhansk region and has also managed to down 6 Russian aircrafts so far. All of these are claims by the Ukrainian government that have been denied by the Russian officials. The European nations, of course, started their preparations to receive a massive influx of refugees who could be bolting from Ukraine. Meanwhile, these are live visuals that have come in of the Russian president meeting the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, who interestingly on the day of the invasion by Russia into Ukraine is of course meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So these are the visuals of the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Remember, the Pakistani Prime Minister, of course, is in Moscow today. So these are the developments that have been happening since this morning, pretty thick and fast, ever since Vladimir Putin on state television came forth and announced that he has sanctioned for a military operation in the Donbas region. But this, remember, is not an operation that is limited to the Donbas region, but is in fact spread far and wide across the length and breadth of Ukraine. And according to information that is of course coming in, this is the scene of complete devastation in places where there have been missile strikes. Remember, this is an area from which information is still only beginning to trickle out. And according to information that is coming, there have been several missile strikes that have been carried out by the Russians. Russia has deployed cruise missiles amongst other varieties of its missiles that it has got to target much of Ukraine's military infrastructure. What Russia is doing with its missile strikes is it is systematically dismantling Ukraine's ability to respond to Russian aggression. It has targeted air bases, it has targeted the anti-aircraft missile systems that Ukraine has deployed, and these are the infrastructure. This is the kind of infrastructure that Russia has been systematically dismantling in several cities in Ukraine. Now remember, for the last several weeks, the West was of course saying that it wants to hold Russia accountable, it wants to create enough deterrence that would make Russia invading into Ukraine an impossibility, but that has clearly not happened. the United States and its NATO allies have been speaking of financial sanctions, but clearly with the way things have moved since this morning, financial sanctions at this point of time do not seem to be having any kind of an impact in terms of Russian intentions that has clearly launched what many would describe as a full frontal assault on Ukraine. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what Russia is, of course, trying to achieve with this full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we are being joined by Mr. Stefan Derice, who is a European affairs commentator and also a journalist who is joining us live on this broadcast on WION. Mr. Derice, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on WION. And let me begin by asking you this. You know, ever since this morning, the events that have unfolded have taken a lot of people, one would say, by surprise. First was the Russian president's statement where he had said that he has sanctioned a military operation in the Donbas region. But from what has unfolded since this morning, this is not a military operation that is restricted to the Donbas region, but is spread wider across Ukrainian territory. What do you make of this?
Yes, it could be called an invasion, and several countries are still reluctant to call it like that. But in Europe and the United States and many other countries around the world are now condemning the actions of Vladimir Putin. It is clear that by occupying Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is serving his own agenda, but the problem is that nobody really knows what his agenda is. For weeks there have been diplomatic negotiations between Russia and the Western allies, but actually all the time what Vladimir Putin was doing was planning this invasion while he was keeping a poker face when he met all kinds of leaders from around the world. Yeah, in Europe, a lot of people are taken by surprise that the war is now a fact. This morning, 4 a.m. Local time here in Amsterdam, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, and of course now the European leaders, but many other world leaders are convening and gathering and discussing about what their reaction should be.
Right, now at this point of time, you know, the West is still talking about financial sanctions. It is still talking about creating the cost, which would be so high that Russia perhaps would back down. But looking at what's been happening since this morning, do you think financial sanctions as a strategy can deter Russia?
I think that it is, I think not, actually, is the short answer. Of course, there have been sanctions in place since 2014 when Russia occupied the Crimea peninsula. And that didn't seem to really bother the Russians. Also in that time, so between 2014 and today, 8 years, Russia has been able to prepare itself for more stricter sanctions. Of course, Russia is one of the main providers of gas and oil of Europe, which makes it difficult for the Europeans to cut all ties with the Russians. So Russia is fully aware of this, how dependent the European Union is on gas. So the sanctions that are put in place today will probably not deter Vladimir Putin from his actions, because he knew that these actions or these sanctions would come, and still he has decided to invade Ukraine this morning.
You know, Ukraine is not a member of the NATO military alliance, and therefore NATO is not duty-bound to, in fact, come to the defense of Ukraine. But the fact is, this entire conflict, many would say, is one of the reasons as to why Russia has launched this operation against Ukraine, is because Ukraine wants to be a part of the NATO military alliance. And here we see that NATO has not been able to come to the rescue of Ukraine. You know, what does it say about Ukraine as a military alliance? Does it point to a certain deficiency where, in case of a nation like Russia attacking one of its neighbors that wants to join the military alliance of NATO, NATO simply would be helpless?
Yes, you have a good point there, absolutely. Of course, the situation in Ukraine is complicated because the country would like to be a member of the European Union, would also like to become a member of NATO. just as many other former Soviet republics already joined NATO, or some of them joined the European Union, like, for instance, the Baltic states. Now, Vladimir Putin is probably afraid that Ukraine will also be lost to Europe. He would like to recreate a sort of Soviet-era style alliance of countries that respond to or obey to Moscow. And of course, this is what has made the situation so difficult. NATO and the European Union never excluded the fact that the Ukraine could become one day a member of both, or one of both alliances, of course, and it has angered Vladimir Putin, and that's probably one of the reasons he decided to invade Ukraine this morning.
And also, looking at the way the conflict has panned out since this morning, I mean, no one expected, that the Russians would carry out an attack on so many different cities through their missile strikes. How do you see this conflict progressing from here? Because the next 24-48 hours are going to be very crucial, which would show as to what the Russian intention is. How far do you think Russia is willing to go in this war?
Yeah, that's of course the big question. What's Vladimir Putin's next move? The NATO just announced that it would send extra troops and also fighter jets to the eastern border of the NATO area, so to Poland, the Baltic states, probably Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, because we have to prepare ourselves for a long and very complicated war. It would not be very likely, I think, that Vladimir Putin is planning on attacks on the European Union. But if that happens, then we're heading towards a full-blown war that maybe could involve also countries in Asia. Of course, over the last couple of months, the ties between Russia and China have been tightened. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, they have met a couple of times, and China is not condemning now. It's not talking about an invasion in Russia. So if China gets involved, this would complicate matters, of course, even more. And I don't want to be a pessimist, but the signs are not very good. We could be heading towards a third world war.
A third world war, that's a prospect that's difficult at this point of time to even comprehend. Now, we have got some statements from Kremlin where it has said that the aim of the Russian military operation in Ukraine is to, in many ways, demilitarize Ukraine and also the complete destruction of the Ukrainian army. To neutralize the military potential of Kyiv is how Kremlin has described the objective of this particular operation. That effectively would mean that Ukraine as a sovereign nation will have virtually no say in having its own army. What do you make of this particular statement by the Kremlin where it says that it wants to neutralize the military potential of Kyiv?
Yeah, it means that they want to dismember a democratic state. Of course, Ukraine has its flaws, but the current president has been elected by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians also would like to decide for themselves whether they will join NATO, the European Union, whether they would like to be independent or whether they would like to be part of Russia. That is not up to a Russian leader to decide. It is strictly interfering in national affairs, but that's not the opinion of Vladimir Putin. He sees Ukraine probably still as a vassal state where he decides what's going to happen, and of course we cannot tolerate such an interference. It's invading another country, aggressing the sovereignty of a country, and of course that is not how Vladimir Putin sees it. He sees that Ukraine is attacking Russia, that the European Union, that NATO is threatening Russia, and that he has to retaliate. So that is his way of putting things. Of course, the NATO, the European Union, and probably a lot of countries around the world see this differently. And now the big question is how to respond. We will know more about that later today. There is an emergency summit of the G7 countries. Right. Then tonight in Brussels, 8 p.m., there will be an emergency summit of all the European leaders. The 27 will gather in Brussels, and there will also be an emergency of NATO countries. So before the end of the day, here in Europe, we will probably have very strong actions against Russia and against Vladimir Putin's actions of invading Ukraine.
All right, that'll be very interesting to see as to how the West, of course, responds to this aggression by Vladimir Putin's Russia. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stefan Derice, for joining us and getting us all those updates and insights in terms of how this conflict may, of course, progress from here. Remember, the next 24 and 48 hours are very crucial in determining what will be the nature and length of this particular conflict and how far Russia is, of course, willing to go in its resolve to try get its way on the issue of Ukraine.